A sada bi zamolila gospodina Predraga Palea, koji je predstavnik iz Lifelong Learning Akademije, a koji je organizator sutrašnjeg postkonferenc dana i ovog završnog predavanja. Pa bi molila gospodina Palea da on predstavi našeg uvaženog gosta danas za završno predavanje.
Hvala. Dobar večer. Vi u ovoj dvorani ste vjerojatno jedini ljudi u Hrvatskoj, možda još postoji ovako nešto ljudi izvan ove dvorane, kojima ne treba objasniti da je upravljanje projektima kritično znanje i vještina za uspješan posao, život i za ovu Hrvatsku. Naš temeljni problem je ne da mi ne znamo upravljati projektima, nego da naši rukovoditelji i političari ne znaju da postoji upravljanje projektima, a kamoli da znaju kako se to treba raditi. Večeras su govornici došli do toga da počinju govoriti o tome da kad govorimo o upravljanju projektima i kad to radimo na ispravan način, naš glavni problem postoji ljudi. I promjene u njihovom ponašanju i promjene u njihovim stavovima. A to je disciplina koja u sebi sadrži upravljanje projektima, ali je puno šira, a zove se upravljanje promjenama ili change management. I zato smo mi u dogovoru sa PMI-em, Lifelong Learning Akademija je prije 8 godina počela sa tečajima project managementa, pa smo shvatili da ljudima fali još toga. Pa smo u dogovoru s PMI-em sutra za vas organizirali postkonferencijski dan na temu upravljanja promjenama i Peter de Jager, nismo nas htjeli, sve oni koji su prošle godine bili na konferencijama i upoznali Petera i veselili se s njim, nismo nas htjeli staviti bez tog zadovoljstva, doveli smo Petera de Jagera da priča o upravljanju promjenama jer je to upravo njegova specijalnost, a onda za one koji su još zainteresirani u petak je radionica problem solving. Međutim, za večeras tu je bilo nekoliko pitanja, Peter će vam govoriti u sljedećih 40 minuta, 30 minuta o managing bad attitudes. Ono što karakterizira Petera je, kažu da je kad znaš nešto jako dobro, to je prva razina umijeća. Kad to znaš druge naučiti, je druga razina umijeća. A kad to znaš prikazati laganim, pa ponekad i zabavnim, to je vrhunsko umijeće i Peter je sasvim sigurno takav. Peter je došao iz Melbournea, Brisbanea, Sydneya, Wellingtona, putuje u Limerick i stao je u Zagrebu. Možda ne zna gdje je, ali sasvim sigurno zna čemu će pričati. Pozdravite Petera i nadam se da će vam biti lijepo.
Could someone please translate my introduction? Because I have no idea how I've just been introduced. I hope he told you I'm going to speak about bad attitudes. Raise your hand if you have a bad attitude. Employee working for you. But we have one in the back. A couple of years ago, I listened to a discussion, I read a discussion on an internet forum. And based upon that discussion, I figured I have to learn a little bit more about this thing called bad attitude. So what I did was a survey of about 100 companies, asking them some basic fundamental questions about what does it mean to have a bad attitude. And the first question, of course, is what exactly do we mean when we say someone has a bad attitude? Now, those of you who've seen me speak before, I don't usually use notes. But since a lot of this stuff comes from the actual survey itself, I want to make sure I get the actual quotations because some of them are rather amusing. Hence, my notes. By the way, if anybody wants a copy of the actual survey, send to them. Give me your business card, write down bad attitude, and I will email it to you. If you don't want it, there's no point printing out 180 copies of something that you're going to throw away in the garbage. Okay, first question was, what's a bad attitude? And I got back a whole bunch of responses. Let me just summarize some of the key words. Someone who has, or is rather not a team player, does the minimum amount of work, disrespectful, insubordinate, always negative, unhappy, pessimistic, offers no solutions, surly, tardy, I like tardy, gossipy, watches the clock all the time, is a prima donna, that means they think they're special, defensive, argumentative, work to rule, abrasive, rude, confrontational, disruptive, inflexible, argumentative, contagious, sarcastic, unpleasant, instigates dissent, and has poor communication ability. For how many of you have I just described a couple of your employees? Put up your hands, please, so we can see how real. Because if none of you have bad attitude employees, there's no part giving this presentation, right? All I can say about this list is I've had people like that. What's amusing, though, is that every time I give this presentation, I know that there are a couple of my old managers scratching their head and saying, he's giving a presentation on bad attitude? And we're going to get to that. Because not all of the bad attitude responsibility lies with the employee. Sometimes it's management's perception of us when we have no intention of being seen as having a bad attitude. I'll ask the question again. How many of you have, by at least one of your managers, been described as having a bad attitude? Show of hands. At least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm sure the rest of you are just shy and don't want to put up your hands. Because here's a statement. If you're really good at your job, sooner or later, management is going to think you have a bad attitude. And we're going to get into that. Next question I asked was, how many employees have you ever had? How many people have worked for you? And then the question after that was, how many bad attitude employees have worked for you? And then I did some mathematics, and I came up with an interesting number. 10% of employees are classified as having bad attitude. 10%. I looked back over my career, and while I was a manager, I had about 30 people working for me. Not all at once, but over the years, in total of about 30 people. And I asked myself the question, how many of them would I classify as having bad attitudes? And sure enough, I came up with the answer 3. It was interesting during the survey is that some people actually wrote down 10% of my employees had bad attitude. In other words, they didn't give me a number. They had done the math already. 10%, pretty high number. We then asked some more questions. And one of the questions was, of all the people who had bad attitude who worked for you, how many of them did you fire, get rid of? 0. How many? 2. So what percentage would that have been out of all of them that had? Here's the statistic that came up. We fire about 2/3 of the people who have bad attitudes. 2/3. So if you do the math, that's about 6% of your total workforce. We end up firing because of bad attitude. Turnover is one of the most important, one of the most expensive, rather, costs that we have. Replacing people, hiring new people. So bad attitude is a financial burden on your organization. Of the 3 people that I had, 2 of them were fired. What was interesting is a number of the statements that I got back from folks. I'll read some of them out. We couldn't fire any of them. We wanted to, but it was a union environment. So there were people we wanted to get rid of, but we weren't allowed to. None. They left before they were fired. And there's an explanation as to how you get someone to leave before they're actually fired. I prepared documentation on 2, but my boss would not let me fire them. In other words, there's pressure here to fire even more than the number that we do. In one case, I made their life so unpleasant that they quit as a result. Anybody here done that? Next one. Everyone I possibly could, at least 80% of them. Someone doesn't like people with bad attitudes. I never had to fire them because I started making it very clear that they would be fired if they didn't change. They all made the right career move. I never fired anyone for bad attitude, but I should have done so. Fortunately, in each case, they quit before it came to that, and none they generally left on their own. Having bad attitudes is a burden. If you have an employee that you can't work well with, that's a big enough problem on its own. But bad attitude employees do something else. And that is they bring the morale down of everyone who's next to them. They're always bad-mouthing. They're always being negative, and it spreads. And it can spread throughout an entire department. They're like a bad apple in a barrel of apples. Sooner or later, all the apples are going to go rotten. So if you cannot fix the problem, ultimately you have to get rid of them. But the question before us is, what can you do to actually address the problem? And there's actually a number of things you can do. We're going to start addressing some of them. First one, well, address it. Actually confront the issue. And sadly, in our organizations, we don't do enough of that. On one of the discussion groups I'm in, a woman posted the following question. She says, I have an employee who comes in late every morning. She said, without actually confronting her, how do I solve the problem? This was posted by someone. It was a real question. My solution is you confront the person. You say, look, you're coming in late every morning. I don't want that to happen anymore. Stop doing it. But strangely enough, we tend to shy away from confrontation. We let people do something for a period of time without giving them feedback that it's wrong. We don't want them to do that. And then we wonder why people are doing something we don't want them to do. One of the things we do in our industries, in every organization, is we have something called an annual performance evaluation. How many people do an annual performance evaluation in your organization? Okay, stop doing annual performance evaluations. If I make a mistake today, don't wait for 9 months before you tell me that, Peter, you made a mistake. You're doing something I don't want you to do. Every week when you meet with me, give me feedback. Let me know what I'm doing. And the other thing we need to do is be more precise. Be precise about what it is I'm doing that you don't like. People have a very, very strange way of communicating problems. I had a most bizarre situation many, many moons ago. I had started with an organization. I'm working with my team. I'm there for about 2 or 3 weeks. We get a new employee on board. And about a week later, one of my other employees, I have 4 other employees plus the new guy, 4 employees. First guy comes into my room, and he says, Peter, I have a problem. What's the problem? I can't work with the new guy. Why not? I can't tell you. Bye. A couple of minutes later, the next one of my 4 come in. Peter, I can't work with the new guy. Why? Can't tell you. Bye. A couple minutes later, the third guy comes in. Peter, guess what? I can't work with the new guy. Why? I can't tell you. He leaves. The fourth guy comes in. I stand up. I go to the door. I close the door. I lock the door. I swallow the key. He says, Peter, I can't work with the other. Why? I can't tell you. The door can't open up. You're not leaving until you tell me. I can't tell you. Tell me. If I don't know what the problem is, no matter what type of problem we're talking about, if I don't know what the problem is, I cannot solve it. If you have a bad attitude employee and you don't know why they have a bad attitude, in other words, you've never asked them specifically, what makes you so angry? Why are you so upset? Why don't you like working here? If I don't know the answer to those questions, I can't solve the problem. Finally, the guy realizes he's not leaving my office until he tells me. He says, the guy smells. Here I'm thinking, it's a big problem. It's a little problem. The guy needs to take a shower more often. I call the new guy into my room. Now, I like the new guy. And my nose is broken, so I can't smell anything. My wife complains about it all the time. How do you like what perfume? I can't smell nothing. So I'm having a conversation. He's a nice guy. I know him. I know his character. How many of you feel comfortable going to someone and say, hey, you smell? We don't like that because we don't like confrontation. But we still need to address the issue. I asked him if he knows the quote by Edison, Thomas Alva Edison. And the quote is, genius is 99% perspiration. and 1% inspiration. I said, do you know that quote? He says, yeah, I like that quote. I said, you're a genius. And I waited. 1, 2. Oh, Peter, oh! He figured it out. I don't go to someone if they have a body odor problem and tell them, you need to clean up your act. Because if I'm not precise, what do? They go to their desk, they clean up their desk. You need to be precise. You need to communicate in a way that people understand what it is you want from them. I'm working with a client right now. He has a problem. His problem is that his people don't engage. They're not engaged. Now, I sort of know what he means. He means that they don't take ownership for their job. They don't show initiative. I get that. But I asked him, what specifically would you like your people to do differently? Now, he's been complaining about this for months. But I asked him, what specifically do you want them to do differently? And he says, I don't know. Well, Guy, if you don't know, how do you expect them to know? So his assignment is to go down, write down on a piece of paper, here's what I want John to do differently. Here's what I want Bill to do differently. And once you've identified that behaviors, now you can create a strategy to get people to do things differently. And we have lots of techniques for changing strategies. So the first thing, you need to address the problem. You need to ask it straight out. What's going wrong? Another solution, and this came up quite often, is you say goodbye. This is, you fire them. And like I said, and I'll be the first to admit it, if you can't solve a bad attitude problem, get rid of the employee. But, and that's an important word, getting rid of your employee should not be your first option. It should not be your second option. It should not be your third, fourth, or fifth option. It should be the thing you use when you run out of all options. And there's many, many different things you can try in an organization. We say that people are our best assets. They're our strength. They make up our teams. They make things happen. That's true. But if we fire someone every time we have a problem with them, you're just going to be spinning your wheels. You're not going to get anywhere. So while firing them, getting rid of them is an option, well, let's leave it to the last one. Not right up front. That's too easy. Find the cause. Not just generally a behavior that they're doing that you don't want them to do, but what exactly is the reason? If I'm distracted at work, it might have nothing to do with work. I might be having a fight with my wife. Or my son might be dying of cancer. If I'm late every morning, maybe it's because, hey, I'm taking my kid to school because my wife is off, she's on a trip somewhere. So what exactly is causing the problem? If you know what the cause is, root cause analysis, even with people, you have a better chance of trying to figure out what's going on. Here's one. Positively ignore the issue. Now, what do I mean by that? Let's assume that someone's doing something you don't like. Fine, ignore it. But make a point of complimenting them and giving them feedback on all the stuff they do that is correct. So that it turns out the only thing they do that doesn't get positive reinforcement from you is the one thing you don't want them to do. I've seen that work, but I'm a much, much more direct person. If I have a problem with you, you're going to know what my problem is. I'm going to tell you simply and plainly what the issue is. So while some people use that strategy, I don't think it's one of the best ones. Negatively ignore the issue. Well, not everything we do about bad attitudes are things we should do about bad attitudes. A lot of the solutions we have, a lot of the approaches that we take, fundamentally don't work. Negatively ignore the issue means, hey, she's not in my department, why should I care? It's someone else's problem. I know it's a problem, but it's not my table. It's someone else's responsibility. And that's not constructive for the entire organization. Even if I see a bad attitude in another department, well, I won't go to the person directly, I'm going to go to their boss and say, hey, you have a problem down here. You may not be aware of it, but you have an issue. That's my attempt to solve a bad attitude problem that's in someone else's department. I'm going to go to their boss. I will not go to their boss's boss, that's going above their head, but I'll go directly to the person who has responsibility for that individual. Prevent it from occurring. And the simplistic approach is, do not hire people who have bad attitudes. Good luck. I don't know what it's like here in Croatia when you do references. When you're hiring someone, they give a reference, where did you work? I don't know if you can phone them up and if you get any good information anymore. In America, North America, all you get is, yes, they worked here from this date to this date. That's all they'll give you. They make no comment about performance or attitude or anything else. Why? Because if you say something bad, they can get sued. I used to do references all the time. I don't do references anymore because they're pointless. I want to spend time with the person. I might even take them out for lunch. We'll go for a walk. We're going to have a long conversation. I want to see how they interact with other people. If I take someone out for lunch and the waiter does something wrong and the person snaps or shouts at the waiter, guess what, guy? You just failed the interview. I'm not interested in hiring you because we have customers. I don't want you doing the same thing to a customer that you would do to a waiter. So there are ways to find out what someone's personality is like. And yes, by all means, see if you can head that off, take care of that easily. Don't hire people who are obviously going to have problems. A couple more. I will be shutting up at 4:30 because you have places to go and beer to drink. Give them training. Give them training in the areas. Sometimes we have a bad attitude because we don't like doing something, and the reason we don't like doing it is that we're no good at it. I don't like accounting, partly because I don't know how to use the accounting system. If I knew how to use the accounting system, I might, well, maybe not enjoy accounting. I mean, who loves accounting? No one loves accounting. Any accountants here? No? Sorry, my apologies. Train them how to do the job. Maybe the problem is training. Maybe they were put into a task with responsibilities and they haven't been given training. I know that training budgets have been cut. I speak for a living. I give workshops for a living. Numbers are down. People aren't being sent to training anymore. You're creating a lot of bad attitude people if you don't send them to my course tomorrow. No. Procrastination. This is how some people take care of the problem. I'm not saying this is a good way, but this is how some people do it. Oh, Bill's been a bad employee. I don't like the way he's doing. I'll take care of it next week. And next week comes, I'll take care of it next week. Why? Again, because we don't like confrontation. Solving a bad attitude problem is primarily finding out what the reason is. Having an understanding of what's going on. Some people have psychological problems. They are mentally ill. They need to be taken care of. I don't know if you have a human resource employee assistance program. Many organizations do. If I have an employee with a drinking problem and their bad attitude stems out of hangovers on Monday that last to Tuesday, I'm not equipped to handle that problem. I can't handle addiction. But I can take that person, point them in the direction of human resources because they are equipped or have the resources to address that. My belief with my staff is I've invested a tremendous amount of money in them. They know a tremendous amount about the organization. Getting rid of people is the very, very last resort that I want to look at. Other reasons for bad attitudes. Anybody here being promoted into a position and someone who reports to you now thought that they should have gotten the position? That's a recipe for a bad attitude. How do you address it? By bringing in the person and going, look, I know you wanted the job. I got the job. Are we going to be able to work together? Because if we're not, now's the time to tell me. Maybe we'll move you elsewhere in the organization, or maybe you can decide that it's time to move on. But if we're going to have a problem, we need to address it. This is also heading it off of the past, taking care of it before it happens. It's a pattern that happens over and over again. Bottom line, you get promoted, and someone in your department that you are now responsible also thought that they are do the job, then you have a potential bad attitude problem right there. And you need to address it. If you just let it fester, it's going to get worse. In part of the survey, there was a really interesting note. And it's one that I believe is at the heart of many bad attitude problems that we encounter. I'll read the whole thing. It's about 8 lines. Since I'm not management, I don't fit your target audience. However, permit me to observe that I find that most employees with a classical bad attitude problem are usually dissatisfied with management-created problems, i.e., nepotism, hiring relatives, favoritism, uneven rewards and punishments, unclear job direction, assignments outside their training, job description, management inattention to phone calls, emails. You communicate with them, they don't communicate back. Lack of respect by management for timelines. Your project managers, has management ever respected your timelines? Ever in the history of project management? In no place that I've worked have employees with bad attitude been fully unjustified with their attitude problem. Many, many years ago, when I was starting out, when I came out of university, I had studied to be a computer person. And I get a job, and I don't know if you can tell, but I am very eager and passionate about what I do. On a Friday afternoon, my manager comes running in and says, "Peter, we have a crisis." Now, whenever management says we have a crisis, what does that usually mean? That management has screwed up and they want you to help them. Agreed? Here's the crisis. At the time I lived in Canada, and what Canada was doing was they were converting from the English metrics to the metric system. And we worked for a grocer at the time, a grocery chain in Canada. Now, the way Canada was doing this was they announced a schedule of when different parts of society would be fully on the metric system. So the road systems were done at one point. We went from miles to kilometers. And then several months later, we would start selling certain types of groceries in kilograms. And then there was the meat department. We would start selling sausages by the meter. Kilogram. So each of these dates had been announced 2 years in advance. Friday afternoon, in the middle of summer, my manager comes running in. "We have a crisis." "What's your crisis?" "Maybe I can help. Because I'm young and naive, and I believe, and I still believe in a perverse way, that if you work really, really hard and are enthusiastic, you will see great things and your career will be wonderful." I'm older and grayer now. And I said, "How can I help? Our problem is that we need to be selling meat in metric on Monday." They've known for 2 years. They come to me on Friday, as well as there was a team of about 8 of us. So what do? Because we're young and naive and stupid. We say, "Yes, we'll help you. We will do it." And starting at Friday afternoon around 3 o'clock, we started working on the project. Went into the system, made changes, brought in cots and sleeping bags. And we stayed there the entire weekend until Monday morning. no testing, but it worked flawlessly. Not a single problem. We were heroes. Well, my manager didn't work with us on the weekend. She had a barbecue or something, a picnic arranged with her family, and she was too busy. I remember her name. I will not mention her name. That would be rude. So the team of 8, Monday morning, 8 a.m., stores open, and we're selling meat by the meter. Amazing job. It's one of those death march projects. On Wednesday, the entire organization is brought into the cafeteria. Senior management is there. They are going to thank the team that did the work. My boss gets up on the stage and gets handed a plaque, an award, by the president of the organization. And she said, "Thank you very much. I'm really happy to have helped," and sat down. Never mentioned my name. Never mentioned the name of anyone on the team. Management has no clue who really did the work. Now, up until that point, I was a passionate, enthusiastic employee. All of a sudden, there was great potential for some bad attitude. Warranted, I believe. Justified. Except, you see, the thing was, I was good at my job. And Wednesday afternoon for lunch, I took a long lunch. And I went to see, what do you call them here, headhunters? I had a meeting with a headhunter. Because I was, this may not translate, let me know. I was pissed off. And I had I didn't cool down. I was what you call a hothead. I was young. I was impulsive. On Thursday, I had a brand new suit. I took a long lunch because I had an interview. And on Friday, I handed in my resignation. Sometimes you can avoid bad attitude. People can avoid bad attitude because they have options. People with options never have bad attitudes. I didn't have time to develop a bad attitude in that organization because I wasn't with the organization long enough to develop it. When the economy is down, when jobs are more difficult to get, where you run out of options, people can disengage. People can very, very quickly develop bad attitudes. Bad attitudes are from people with no options. So I think that writer was correct. A lot of the times, bad attitudes are not really a problem with the individual, but a problem with management. Let me tell you the story that caused me to do this survey, to give you an idea of how bad it can be. There's an employee working for an organization. He's a really good employee. He's a Class A performer. He's wanted and valued by the organization. Someone approaches from another company, approaches that employee and offers him a job. And he made him an offer he couldn't refuse. 50% increase in salary. Come work for us. Now, the guy's worked for the original company for about 10 years. He knows everything about the organization. He's a good employee. He's a great employee. And he goes to management. He says, "Look, I don't want to put you over a barrel. I don't want to force you, but here's the situation. I've been offered 50% more than I'm currently making. I don't want to leave when I have a mortgage. And I'll have a son soon who's going to be going to university. I need, the money would come in really handy. Can you do anything?" And the organization says, "Well, sorry, we want you to stay, but we can't afford it." So the guy says, "Look, okay, well, bye." And he leaves. About a year later, it turns out that while the money is good, the company sucks. It's a terrible place to work. So he comes knocking on the door and says, look, I know I left, but I was a good employee and you know that. Could I come back? And the company goes, well, we don't have a full-time position for you. Your job's been replaced. But I tell you what, if you're willing to come back part-time, the first available job that comes up, you can have it. We expect that to happen in about a year. It's going to be less money than you were making before. And the guy goes, but the first opening that opens, I'll get that? Yeah, absolutely. So he says, okay. He has a conversation with his wife. He says, okay. He comes on board part-time. And for a year, he's there, part-time. Great employee, enthusiastic, does more than he has to. He was naive and stupid and enthusiastic, all that good stuff. And then on a Friday afternoon, his boss calls him in and says, good news, a job has opened up and you can start next week. The guy goes, yes, wonderful. And he does the dance of joy. He goes buys a bottle of champagne, takes it home to the wife, and they celebrate. All his hard work, his sacrifice is going to pay off. He's going to be back in a full-time job. He's going to be back on full salary. Wonderful thing. His manager had a meeting with some other senior management, and it turns out that the job is going to be going to someone else. And on Monday morning, manager calls him in and says, I'm sorry, John, but you know what I said on Friday? Forget it. The job's been taken by someone else. We're really sorry. And now the guy is pissed off. This is a story that I heard being discussed on a human resource internet forum. The guy's now got a bad attitude. He's working to rule. He's not enthusiastic anymore. He's grumpy. He's telling bad stories. He's being very negative. He's working to rule, etc., etc., etc. And the question posed to everybody on this forum was, what should we do with the employee? Rather, what should we do with this problem? There were about 100 responses from human resource professionals. Every single response had exactly the same advice. Fire him. Bad attitudes are the responsibility of the employee. The employee must change. Now, I would agree with the fire him bit of advice. But who do you think I would be saying should be fired? Manager. You do not make promises to staff and then not keep them. If you want to create bad attitude in your organization, it's really, really easy to do. And that's the problem, because we do it a lot. I'm not saying that every bad attitude employee is a result of bad management. There are people who you hire that have a sense of entitlement, that you owe them a job. And it doesn't matter what they do, they should still get paid. Those people exist. And you can work with them. You can try to find them other work in the organization that they like better, this, that, the other. You can try to help that problem. But sometimes the only solution is to fire them. But there are a lot of bad attitude situations where the problem doesn't lie with the employee. It lies with management. If we're firing 66% of our individuals with bad attitude, if 6%, that 6% turnover rate that we have, if that's all due to bad attitude, we got to ask ourselves the question, who created the bad attitude? Is it a manager causing problems? Or is it problems with the employee? My purpose with this presentation is to raise the question in your mind. Those of us who have identified as having bad attitudes, and they exist, are they at fault or are we at fault? Would there be fewer bad attitude problems in an organization if we were better managers? My expertise is change management. How we get people to change. How we bring change about in an organization. And quite frankly, a lot of the resistance that I encounter has got nothing to do with the change and everything to do with how we try to bring it about. I'll give you one example. Think back to the last big meeting that you had in your organization where you were called together in a room, senior management stood on top of the room, and they go, we're announcing a change. Blah, 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 yada, yada, yada. Benefit, 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 blah, 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 yada, yada, yada. And at the end of that, we always ask a question. What do we ask? Are there any questions or concerns about what we've just discussed? All right? What usually happens in your organization when that happens? Let me guess. Tell me if I'm right. Dead silence. And 99% of the time, dead silent. And every now and then there's 1% who isn't. Typically, it's a person who's new to the organization. Now I'm speaking from experience. This was driven home, how bad the situation is. About 6 years ago, when I was in, they were announcing a change. They asked the question, are there any questions or concerns? And one young woman who'd only been with the organization for about 2 or 3 months and hadn't yet picked up the culture of the organization, stood up, hand up in the air, and said, I have a question. And the manager, the director of the organization, and here I'm not lying, reached into his pocket, took out a little black book, opened it up, leant into the audience, and said, what was your name? What have they just been told? Do not ask questions. Change management is all about one question. One question. I'll let you demonstrate it. Everybody on the left-hand side of the room, stand up, move over to the right. Everybody on the right, stand up, move over to the left. What's the first question that goes through your mind? Why? All change management revolves around that question. And I can guarantee you something, that if you have an organization that does not allow that question, if you have an organization that is not willing to answer the question, why, then you're going to have more bad attitude than you can handle. I'm done. Perfect timing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter.
I will have books in the back. There will be questions, not now. We are done. Your conference is over. But in the back, if anybody wants to ask me some questions, please, I will be there, but will not be on stage. And finally, if you want a copy of the handout that I've been reading from, using, give me your business card, write down bad attitudes, and I'll get that to you via the mail.